The meeting and call to order.
Is that a percentage or something?
I'm going to change the order of business in two ways. The first is, it was very upsetting to many of us to hear that Mark Thorne, who was a member of this committee, and a selectman and a gentleman's gentleman with a phenomenal sense of humor, bright, for me almost a mentor, passed away today. For those who want to, I'd like to stand and have a moment of silence in honor of Mark. Okay, thank you. The second change is going to be, since Kate patiently waited here from her Board of Selectmen meeting, and my intention is to get her home at a reasonable hour, we're going to move up the discussion on a couple of items from Kate's perspective and get some of her insight. One of the things that we've done here over the last 3 years, is we had Kate and we had Jen and we're back with Kate, is to get some ideas, some insights. We're reorganizing a little bit based upon the changes of the fact that was done officially last year. But I'm in full agreement with Kate that this is Kate's budget until the Board of Selectmen approves it. Now, that's not to say that Kate's operating in a vacuum or anything, but it's Kate's budget until the full Board of Selectmen approve it, and then it's theirs. In the past, what happened is that after all of the various departments, important departments presented, people would then go back and meet with the department heads. But really, we should be addressing our questions to Kate, because Kate's met with the department heads. And that's what we do with the Board of Education, and it should be done also with the Board of Selectmen.
Can I just go further?
Sure.
It's my feeling that when I put together a proposal to the Board of Selectmen, it's my responsibility to defend it at that point. That, the departments made their requests, and I either approved, amended, or rejected them. And it's my responsibility to defend to the Board of Selectmen why I took the actions I did. It's no longer the department head's responsibility to defend their request. And, going forward, then the Board of Selectmen should do the same, defend their proposals to the Board of Finance and so on.
Now, that something that we had started based upon the only word I could say is that a number of years ago, the year before I took over, F&B did not approve the Board of Selectmen budget, and there was some motions from the floor which created some angst between the Board of Finance and the F&B. And we had a very positive thing from my perspective, is that we ended up with a new chair of F&B. Not that it's bad from any of the prior people, but in the same year, Kate took over as town administrator, John Zagroski took over as the chair of the Board of Finance, and I took over as F&B chair. And I believe the three of us have been able to work very well together in looking at new ways in which to review. One of the things that we've done is we get out, and Jamie's always been very good in allowing our committee to ask questions throughout the budget process, and even make comments before the Board of Selectmen do their final vote. But we now get out ahead of the Board of Finance's vote, so there's no surprises when we come into the final budget. if somebody's uncomfortable with that, we want to know. And quite honestly, some things, and I'll mention what we did on the Board of Ed side. There was a discussion of whether or not we needed a slate roof at 45 Leroy. We challenged that, and that saved the town about $150,000. There was a question when it was first given on the cafeteria expansion, being an estimate of $1 million, and we had a little bit of discomfort with that. And so I was actually speaking to Dr. Adley about this. I said, so I went to Deb Ritchie, who now sits on your board, and the two of us went to Dennis Maroney, who now sits on your board, and the three of us went to John Zabrowski and said, can we just give them about $100,000 to $200,000 to let them figure this out? And then that's what happened. The $1 million was pulled back, and we went from there. So getting out ahead of that eliminates any surprises. But we also set up a buddy system. And the buddy system said that we would look at certain aspects of the budget in conjunction with the Board of Finance member. And while we'll continue to do that, the fact is that we do not have an intention to then go meet with the department heads, because that's contrary to the concept we just put out. So one of the things that we were talking about, and if Kate can provide any insight into this, I know it's something that Public Works did when Mark was chair, and they continue today, is that I'm going to send out things where we can divvy up various aspects of both the Board of Ed and the town. I've eliminated that you're either on one committee or the other, because there's too much to look at and we need cross thought. But then, like on the Public Works, we have somebody who might look at the sewer commission, or somebody who might look at the transfer station. And you sort of become the point person or persons for that. Somebody can be on Park and Rec. Like, I already know that Stacy will handle police, but somebody else can go with her on that. So that's sort of like we have certain bond expertise in here, so we can look at bonds. Because Bert doesn't like me at all, Bert suggested that we also start to take a look at what's going on in the pensions.
We're gonna have a good one for you this year.
Yeah. So, and I said after the treasurer, that's just what I needed. Thank you.
Then I win all kind of popularity.
Yeah. So, Kate, how would you suggest that we best set this up? And by the way, this is a throughout the year type of thing, so that when something comes into the budget, we have the knowledge beforehand. And that's the whole concept of it.
How to set it up during the year?
Yeah.
One thing I would do is watch the quarterly joint department head meetings, because that's where you see a lot of things are talked about. What people are seeing, what they're planning for, what's been going on. But during the year, call the department heads, ask them. We don't have a problem with people talking to the staff.
No, never have.
Yeah.
However, I spoke to Ed, and we talked about, because Ed will be the point person for the Public Works, because I asked, do you mind if you go here and there? And he goes, no, I'd like to be the point person, but we don't want to consume his time, because he has a job.
He has a job, and he right now, his new highway superintendent just started today, so we're breaking him in with an ice storm in the morning. Yeah.
So, does anybody have any questions about that? Feel free to ask Kate, myself, and I'm going to try and go back to how the old list that the Board of Finance uses of how they make assignments.
Yeah, and we, our Board of Selectmen schedule is on the web, what we're, the order we take the departments in. We try and knock out a lot of the general government departments because they tend to be smaller, so the very first meeting is like the 28th, the last Tuesday of the month. And we'll start at 5 o'clock and try and knock out, a whole bunch of the smaller things. But the schedule's on the web, so come to the meetings or watch them.
It's this one that I sent around to everyone.
Yeah.
So the only one that seems to be a little tight is the Wednesday meeting. The Tuesday and Wednesday meeting are starting at 5:30. The good thing is they are all filmed. I do feel that there is an advantage, and I'm just looking for Rob, but he's not here. Bert's been there, Barry's been there, Mike, Stacy, Iris. I think that there's an advantage. Bill also, I just looked across. There's an advantage of going there so that if you have a question, you can ask it after. So it's presented. The Board of Selectmen will ask their questions when they're done. Jamie allows the committees to ask their questions of what's going on. I think that sometimes it's good to be there so we ask it, because my own philosophy again is Kate has a job. And so it's a lot easier to ask that question then than to ship something off to me or to Bert and then over to Kate, when we could have just asked the question there.
It's okay if they, it's okay if they send later.
Yeah.
I just would rather questions get asked, while we're going through the process, and don't wait until, the night before you all are going to vote on the budget. Because if there are things that you're seeing as we're going through that you're uncomfortable with, it gives us an opportunity to respond and make changes. And I think, we do, as soon as the budget is printed, we get it up on the web. I really advise reading not just the numbers, but the text. Departments will be putting information about the statistics they track, the performance measures, what they see is happening in their department for the next 5 years, what they've done this year. We don't put in the detail behind the numbers, but you should know that when you see a line item, there's a lot of detail behind it that we have in the budget system. When the Board of Selectmen is meeting, when the Board of Finance is meeting too, Jen has the computer with her, and we have access to all that. So if you see, good one, the police salary line item in patrol, it's like $3 million. And we can sit there and go and tell you each and everything that makes up that $3 million. Ed will take the fuel and break it down by the gallons. We'll take all the, the different pieces. Sometimes, people get a little bit ridiculous in breaking things down, but we try and have every line item supported from zero. We don't publish it because you end up with a book like this thick, but it's there.
So with a website.
Can I ask you something? Because we come in the end, and I always struggle with the fact that I don't know enough about the beginning. Any budget process is top down and bottom up, and it goes back and forth, and it's a dialogue. How does it work in the town administration? Do you start with a top down where you say, okay, this year we have a 0 increase in the overall line, and then you work your way down this way, and then the other guys work their way back up? If you could tell us a little bit more about the process, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, so that is exactly how we started. We told them, hold the line. You've got to try and hold the line, and any new requests had to be supported. We start usually in beginning of November with just some training refresher on how to use the system and what we're looking for, and the different forms we're using. Like if you want to ask for a new employee, we have a position request form that you have to complete, justify, and it gets into, why you want the person, what they're going to do for you. We have capital forms that actually they came out of stuff Martha put together a number of years ago to try and answer all sorts of things. What's your ROI? Is this being done to answer state regulations? So we go over all those forms, and the instruction is you have to provide detail behind your line items. You can't just put in $5,000 for office supplies. There has to be some support to it. If you're going to give me $70,000 for programs, well, what are those programs? And then, then we start talking.
And so every department head has to defend.
They have to defend their right. So right after the new year, starting January 3rd, actually, Jamie and Jen and I will meet with each and every department head. And we go through the questions that the three of us have on their budget. And we ask them to highlight anything in particular that they want to bring up. But that's again, something, when you're looking at the budget, reading the documents, look at that kind of discussion, because we put in what are the budget drivers? What's the primary thing that moves your budget? What's new? And that information, we try to provide all that information in there.
So out of all these discussions, in the end, comes an aggregate number.
Yes. And
which sometimes you like.
Well,
and other times you do not like.
Other times I do not. Well, but it's also, we have all the discussions, but then I also go through and just do, some numerical things. Download the budget into Excel and look at all the accounts that are a certain percentage over last year's budget or over last year's actuals. So, maybe your budget was $5,000 last year and you're asking for $5,000 this year, but the year before you only spent $2,000. So, we have to have a discussion about that. So we go back and go through all those kind of things.
I do want to interrupt here because, and I'm cutting in, but it's something that I was going to talk about later, but this is the opportune time. One of the things that John mentioned John Zagrowski, when he was showing that we were 2.4 million over, many of the items that created that 2.4 million have already been addressed in this year's budget. As an example, part of that 2.4 million of available funds was simply because F&B and members here went through some older reserve accounts and freed up from assigned to unassigned and found some room in the budget for expenses. But the other thing is, Kate, Jamie, and Jen did exactly the exercise that was just going on by reviewing what the expenses have been budgeted over the last couple of years, what has actually been spent over the last couple of years, and then make modifications accordingly. And while it's always a dangerous slope to cut when somebody's being efficient in what they're doing, because you don't want to cut too thin, some of the budget variance that was favorable by not being spent had already had its first review in the current year's budget.
Right, and got eliminated. But some other things happen. Like by the time we go to final budget process, we might not have our final rates from the insurance carrier. So, we go in, we have good information, we're estimating, but we don't necessarily have the final rates from Connecticut. And so there's savings there. We make assumptions. If we're going to hire a new employee, we make assumptions on whether there'll be family coverage. When will we hire them? That can cause a variance in the salary line. But you mentioned pensions. The pension board will be meeting in January. They'll be meeting with our actuaries, and the actuaries are going to recommend changing our mortality table.
I'm all for it.
This is for the first time.
Personally, I mean.
Yeah. For the first time, there are actually mortality tables that are designed for public employees.
And there's a nuance there. You should mention what the nuance is of what they found.
They found that public employees live longer. So there are three different tables. There's a police table, a teacher table, and an everybody else table. So they're recommending that we implement that. They're also recommending that we reduce our interest earnings assumption from we're at 6.5 to 6. So what I have put in the budget, what I recommend the Board of Education and the library put in the budget is the highest. That we would make that, put the mortality table in and drop the interest rate assumption in one fell swoop. I don't know yet what the pension board will recommend doing. You know, they may say something totally different, but I'm pretty sure that the mortality table will be going in. It's not a bad year for this to happen because the Board of Finance chose to redeem some bonds last year, which will be saving us significant money in the fiscal 2021 budget. So it's not a bad year for that to happen.
That's the 1.8 that's being paid off that was in January that was due. And so, in December, right? And that is saving, in my estimate, something about 23 basis points because it would have been in the debt service in next year's budget.
Yeah.
That's a conservative approach, and then nobody can argue with that, right? Because you just reserve more.
Well,
because you change two important assumptions.
Yeah.
The two most important assumptions, actually.
So I did have a question on that. I heard this at the library meeting, and I'm assuming the Board of Ed knows, I know the library knows.
Yep.
So if I recall, and I know you'll feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, in the last a couple of years we made a slight modification to the pension because an actuarial miscalculation or something along those lines. And weren't we... When
we switched actuaries, we found that there had been an error made under the previous actuary.
Okay. So if I recall, part of our catch-up was being done over a 10-year period?
We amortized some things over 10 years, yeah.
Oh, is that going to be a similar situation, or are we changing that prior amortization?
We're not changing we're basically what the actuaries are recommending is not changing the end date of the amortization. Okay, so anything that was, I think one thing was amortized over 20 years even.
Yeah.
They're assuming now an 18-year amortization period because we're 2 years.
Okay, so the numbers may change, but the period will be the same.
Yes.
You see, I do remember some really arcane information on this stuff.
So, if I understand it correctly, the additional cost, potentially for these two additional changes, would not be impacted fully in 1 year, but be amortized over 18 years?
Well, anytime they do things in evaluations, they amortize it over a long period. But there is a significant impact right away in our contribution. If we made no changes in our mortality table or our interest rate assumptions, our pension contributions would be relatively flat this year. But making these changes, it jumps the contributions up. It will drop our OPEB contribution for the non-police, which is positive.
I'm sorry, this is a good year to make this adjustment.
Because we have room
is an adjustment some sort of a catch-up or the first
no, it's not
multi-year adjustment?
It's not a catch-up. It will jump our contribution, the recommended contribution to the plan significantly. And
Going forward.
Going forward. So starting this year.
It's in next year's budgeting going forward.
But we won't see, if they do everything at once, if they go to the new mortality table, and if they drop to 6% on these assumptions, basically we'll have one big jump. They could choose to drop the interest rate assumption like over a 4-year period, which would make, we would still have additional jumps based on that change over the next 4 years.
But the reason why this appears to be a good year to do it is, if you recall in the RTM, I think it was our last meeting prior in October, we approved
redeeming bonds
of about 2.6 something, it was 2.1 million, but 300,000 wasn't going to be in the fiscal 21 budget, it was for fiscal 22. So we saved about $60,000 of interest, but we also, by redeeming that, when we go to the smoothing of our debt repayment, we had already paid the 1.8 from there. And if we use the standard, for those that knew, whenever we look at what we really look at for the most part, it's something in the neighborhood of about 85,000, because we will say that moves the needle 1 basis point. So when I did a calculation of 85, it reduces. If we did nothing, next year's budget would have been down, had 25 basis points reduction, because we prepaid things that would due in fiscal 21. So hence, if we're doing it in this year, it's not a bad year to do it, because we're already starting a little bit low.
We have a little room in the budget for
May I
it.
ask, from what funds did you prepay it?
From the
reserve?
It was a transfer from the fund balance.
From general fund, because there were a number of issues, as we'll talk about in detail, but also there were a couple of things that either for fiscal conservative reasons we weren't putting down certain income. There were a couple of other things that were there, but with the exception of one item, all of the things that contributed were either one-time, reviewing various outstanding funds that were there, which we did in conjunction with the Board of Finance, or have been addressed in this current year's budget. We recorded $425,000, I believe, in educational cost sharing. The Board of Ed increased what they were anticipating to get back from excess cost reimbursement. May have, based upon the numbers, increased it a little bit more than they should have, but the fact of the matter is so most of the drivers that created the $2 million overage had been addressed in various ways when we were doing this current year's budget that we're in.
So we're not expecting that big. We're not expecting that large of a positive result this year.
But
So-
how does it work for you?
Finish. So when John said we're dealing with it, I was smiling a little bit, because the two boards already dealt with it going into this year.
So, but how do we deal with it when you start out? Going back to what I'm interested in. Do you already know how much of the fund balance we're gonna draw down? Or is this gonna be entirely left to the Board of Finance?
That gets left to the Board of Finance. The Board of Finance, or Board of Selectmen, typically doesn't get into the revenue issues as much, other than asking people to take a look at them. But they're not going to change revenue estimates. We never would make an assumption on the fund balance, but lately the Board of Finance has taken the policy of not using fund balance as a revenue offset in the budget. They assume revenues will cover operations.
One of the main changes, and this was done in a Board of Finance general fund policy, which is what John talked about, is our bottom level is 12, but we're looking within these areas. Was we changed, the Board of Finance changed some of the calculation. In the past, we used to do, as part of the budget, $1 million drawdown. We never drew it down, for the most part. We really
Never drew the whole thing down.
Right. So they eliminated that concept. And one of the things they did is they were looking at 12% of what the part of the budget that we control. I'm alluding, I forget, but I think it has to do with some of the revenue side of that. The things that we control is the 12%. But the other thing that they did is when we were calculating out what our tax rate is that we've taken the last 5 years of collections, what the actual collection rate was, and then we deduct 25 basis points, which really doesn't sound like a lot, it's 0.25%. I just have to remind people, it's 0.25% on an $8.4 billion portfolio. So it does matter. It's about $200,000-300,000. So, and that becomes our collection rate that we apply to the grand list to determine what the taxes will be. So that changed some of it. We still have some flexibility in there should collections go down or up. But that was one of the new policies that they're doing. Jen has mentioned, and we have mentioned, that we talked in prior meeting that we'd be very interested in seeing a similar Board of Finance guidelines or policy, whatever they want to call it, on the reserve fund for capital and non-recurring expenses, because that the contingency in there appears to be high at this stage. But again, it's not us. We don't have the right to go in and say, hey, spend this money. But we may sort of like tell them, spend this money.
Sometimes you get mad when they spend it without talking to you first.
Well, that, and not me personally, but the RTM was a little bit annoyed because of a timing issue. Out of that contingency, it was
Streetlights.
for the streetlights, based upon that it was happening in August. But even with that, how much was that? Do you recall? So what the
It was a
cost
couple
of it?
$100 grand.
Yeah,
Yeah, it was a couple of hundred.
200.
Yeah, so it wasn't
Got
really
Got approved, didn't it?
Not by it didn't have to go to the
for
RTM.
because they did it out of the contingency. But but Ed came back to the RTM and explained that. But again, it was a $200,000 item. It wasn't as if
That was
we were
time
spending
sensitive
half
too, though.
Yeah.
That was
Yes.
an issue.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and one of the reasons why that account even exists, Mark will remember, goes back to when Craig Curtis was chairman of the Board of Finance. There can be times when we do have things that are time sensitive, and to go through the whole process to get to the RTM, to get it approved, it just takes too long. And this gave the Board of Finance flexibility to approve capital items when they came up, because it was moving from one appropriation to another.
And we will see a slight difference on the Board of Selectmen side than the Board of Ed, because there's a lot of small capital items where, rather than every wrench being listed, I'm using that as an example, but I know what wrench is in capital, but they may have $4,000 added to the balance in the capital account on an ongoing basis for about 10 of these. And some years they may spend $6,000, and other years they may only be spending $2,000. And if you ask if we've looked at it, the answer is no.
Kate,
Yeah.
just a kind of a mindset question. When you made my spotlights of news, so if it's a ignorant question, give me at least one pass.
I give Jack a lot. So.
There you go. We all do, though, Kate, don't we?
Hey, you beat me to it.
So, when you said hold the line to your department heads in terms of budget, is that a message to department heads? I expect discipline on your budgets, but give me what you think you're due, or is
Yes.
it I want discipline on your budgets, and by the way, I'm not allowing anything above a zero increase. I don't know if you see the difference.
It was the former,
Okay.
because, and actually, that was direction from the Board of Selectmen. They felt that, they want people to hold the line as much as possible, but if there's something you really need, ask for it. And my philosophy has always been, if there's something you think you need to ask for it. And we might turn you down, but you need to ask for it. And if we turn you down this year, if you really need it, ask for it again next year. Don't ask once and then come back to me 5 years later and say, well, you turned me down and I really needed it. Well, you've got to keep, if you don't get it, at first, keep making the point that you need it.
So it's tell me what you need, not here's what you have to work with, and work within that.
Right. Not this year. There have been years when that's been the message.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
All right,
But,
that's helpful.
And knowing this year, we have one contract that will be open. Public Works contract expires June 30th. So hopefully negotiations will be starting in the next couple months. So you won't see an increase built into those wage lines, but the police contract has a couple more years, and the town hall contract has a couple more years. So you'll see contractual increases in those line items. And so, department head doesn't really have a lot of control over that. So we're not asking them to cut other areas to accommodate those wage increases.
Got it.
To give you some examples, civilian dispatch had been floating around for about
Well,
5,
when
6
Wayne
years.
was here.
Yeah, and it was sent back. We want more analysis. And when I'm saying we, I'm talking about the town, not F&B, but Kate requesting more from the police department and other things like that. And quite honestly, that's something else. The way I like to put it is, if I look at the town, which is a $30 million business, we have 3 or 4 finance people to running this $30 million business. So when occasionally we offer our services to help in any way possible, because we do know how to do accounting, we do know how to analyze things, and some of us are just, in semi-retirement or fully retired. And so we can offer the services here and the thought process. So, on the police department, if they need something, I know that Rob Cordone, who's now on the Board of Finance, and Stacy have said, you have an analysis, I expect you to be our cop, I don't need you to be our accountant. So, we're more than willing to provide some services so that the information is available. And that's something that I think is a good service for this committee as a whole to try and do. Obviously, if we're doing something like that, we're working for Kate, we're working for Jen, we're doing that. That's our authorizing management. This is what I need done. Can you help me and do this and return back to them? Because it's their town. They're responsible for it. We're just providing resources. So, but yes, I've been a firm believer that we could use another analyst in the finance department for some time. But they're cheap. But yeah, so like the civilian dispatch is a good example of what keeps on coming. We came back a number of times and finally went in. We have, and I mentioned it, when we took the civilian dispatch, one of the agreements is that there would be a narcotics officer, which Jamie mentioned still hasn't been selected or deployed. I don't know if that's an extra FTE.
No.
But
no. The reason we haven't deployed that is we haven't been at full staff.
Right. Okay.
With the police force. So that's not going to happen until we have a full complement of 51 officers.
And it's also something like, I believe last year, if you saw some variance of what was budgeted for the police force versus what was spent for the police force, there was some variation, but that was because the contract came in and there were a lot of retirements and changes in management, so it takes a little time to fill out. In addition, Kate was mentioning when we're doing contracts, they have for lack of a better word, a reserve account, I believe on the balance sheet, where they will accrue for contract costs.
Well, you're half right.
I'll take that half.
In the budget, under general overhead miscellaneous, there's an account for contingency, which is our general contingency. Then there's another account that says salary contingency. In that account, you'll always see an amount there for wage increases for non-rep employees and part-time employees. When there's a contract open, we also put an assumed dollar for settlement in that account. So you'll see that account go up and down over the years. So this year it will have an amount that is based on what we think we'll be giving to non-reps, and another amount for what we think we'll be settling the contract for with Public Works. if we don't settle by the end of fiscal 21, we will accrue the portion for the public works settlement, and it'll sit in a balance sheet account until that contract is settled.
And then, so it doesn't, when you settle it and you're getting this payback, you're not getting a single hit because it's already been accrued on the balance sheet.
Yeah.
So, but know that there is a balance sheet account out there. Periodically, you'll hear the Board of Finance say, all right, we've got to clean up the dental plan based upon this and that, and so we'll take $5,000 to make sure that the numbers are right. So that's where that's coming.
Got it.
So, your technology plan.
Right. So Thursday we opened. We received a couple of responses to an RFP we put out to have a technology assessment and an implementation plan put together for us. So the Board of Selectmen approved the money tonight. Hopefully the Board of Finance will tomorrow night. We're going to hire a firm to come in and take a look at all of our software programs on the town side, not the Board of Ed. So if you're unfamiliar with how we operate, we're kind of like a conglomerate. We have multiple lines of businesses. One software does not fit all for us. So, planning and zoning, building, the permitting departments have a software. Parks and Rec has a software package. Tax does. Assessment does. Finance does. Then there's some smaller ones. The police department has some big stuff. And then there's some smaller ones throughout. So, we're asking them, take a look at everything we've got. Are we optimizing the services that we've got? Can we make what we've got work better together? Can we reduce the number that we have in any way? Can one software do things that we don't know if it can do, and we can eliminate some of them? Are there ways to make them integrate with one another? Can we do more online? That's a key focus for us. The more we can do online, we feel that the better we'll be serving our customers. Can we reduce the number of points of sale online and reduce the number of credit card processing companies and looking at other types of payment? Right now we do credit cards, check, and cash. Can we take Venmo? Can we take PayPal?
Can we do ACH, which we do on
the tax
side,
right,
but no place else. And coming from the cash side of Chase, it's the cheapest transaction that they're going to charge, and the corporate side. So moving somebody from doing a direct debit is cheaper than even doing a debit card or a credit card.
Right.
So if the Board of Finance approves that tomorrow night, they should be starting, I would assume, after the holidays, but we expect in a 2 to 3 month period of them to come in and meet with everybody and do all the assessments, look at the departments that don't have technology now, and what can they do there.
We have a town clerk who's retired.
So we expect to have the results of the plan by the time the budget is in the Board of Finance's hand, but before it's done.
Now, this committee has been pushing. Oh, go ahead, Stacy, since you know. Go ahead. You could.
I'm very excited.
It took us a couple of years to get there.
Motion to approve.
Now, this has been asked, and I'm excited that they're doing it. We also believe that when we're talking about the credit cards, and I'm very happy with how Kate presented it, we believe when we were talking about convenience fees and everything, which most of us are very used to paying and other things like that at this stage of the game, and the Board of Ed immediately just went through with theirs. But it really is a step back in a cash management, because not only is it an evaluation, like ACH is 2 days later, direct debit's 2 days later, it's in your Fed account, immediate available funds. If you're using a credit card, what's the settlement date on it? When are we being paid? How are we being paid? Because it may not be coming in for another week, depending upon what the system is. Obviously, if we have 5 different merchant processors, we are not getting the maximum amount of any of that value from there. So it's really almost a cash management discussion as well. And, several towns do have front ends where you just go right in and then you pick out what you're paying and your payment options there, and then it feeds it out to the various systems. So I'm very excited about that, and if there's any way we can help or
Brad was on that
participate,
committee too, by the way.
Yes, I will.
yes. And any way we can help or assist or be a pain in the behind, let us know. So
Did we apply
to the
no, but we limited our outreach to firms that were in Connecticut, mostly in Connecticut, and that we knew were familiar with municipalities. And we said to the selectmen tonight, I didn't want to name the company, waiting for the Board of Finance to approve the funding, but it is somebody that Jen and I are both familiar with, and I have every expectation that they will do very good work.
I should also mention that, the town also does training. Last week when I walked in, I don't even remember why, but I was in town hall, everybody was leading a time management course.
Time management, yeah.
So, and virtually the whole town was there. I also heard, which you may want to explain a little bit, is that there's going to be a test on hours. Is that official or not official?
Test?
Well, in other words, from...
the flexible schedule.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. So one of the things that was in our town hall union contract was to negotiate the possibility of a flexible schedule. And we had to negotiate it with them because their contract says they get paid overtime after 8 hours in a day or 40 hours in a week. Something I would dearly love to change. But we wanted to try out a flexible schedule with closing 1 day a week. Closing 1 day a week and staying open later hours 1 day. And the two reasons were, we know a lot of our residents commute. And so to get here by 4:30 is difficult. If you're working in Manhattan, you're having to leave at noon to get here in time to do something by 4:30. So we wanted to offer a night where we were open later. We also have, for our higher level staff, it's harder and harder to recruit. People are coming from further and further away. We have department heads who live, as far away as, one is like in Guilford. We have an assistant who's in Beacon Falls. We have people in Newtown and Milford, Trumbull. So we've got people commuting from serious distances. So we thought one way to make us more attractive is if we had a 4-day work week. So in the summer, beginning of June through the Friday before Labor Day, we are going to be open 4 days a week, Monday through Thursday. We'll be open from 8 a.m. to 5:15 on Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And on Tuesdays, we'll be open from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. So, department heads are all tasked right now with determining, how the staffing will work, because the agreement with the town hall union is for 8 and 3/4-hour days. So like on that long day, somebody will work from 8 to 5:15 and somebody will work from like 10 to 7. So how are they going to staff it? They have to track what are they doing now on Fridays that people will be upset if they can't come in on Fridays and do. How will we offer that service? If it's something that people are used to doing on a Friday, well, how are we going to make it possible for them to still do it? And we hope it will go well. We hope it will serve the public well. We'll hope it will serve the employees well. We've already determined that the building department will have an inspector on duty on Fridays. We've determined that was one thing we could not go without. So they'll work one will work Tuesday through Friday, and one will be Monday through Thursday.
I'm assuming that this is for town hall, and so like the transfer station will still.
It will not. It will impact town hall. It will not impact the public works department at all. The clerical staff at the police department will work a 4.5 day week. So they will work longer hours Monday through Thursday and half a day on Friday. But the police department will still be 24/7.
So anybody who's listening, and I'm going to start requesting that Seth mention this frequently. If you want to buy your beach sticker or later your dump sticker, do not wait till Friday.
Well, but that's one of the things that, so Parks and Rec needs to evaluate. What do you do for somebody who wants to buy their beach sticker on Friday? Is there a way to make it possible? Like, could they buy it at the beach? Is there a way to make that happen? So, department heads are supposed to have their plans in place by March 1st so that we can then, poke holes at things and finalize them. But, that's the kind of thing that, is there another way to work that? Is it as simple as just saying, no, get it done by Thursday, or can we find a way to make it?
But the Friday before Memorial Day is
We'll be open.
Yeah,
We'll be open,
exactly.
yeah,
because
that's
that seems
the
to be a
biggest
big
day.
fraud.
Right. But
Yeah.
the other thing that I'm hopeful that the technology looks at is what I call, sometimes it's called breakthrough technology. And when I was doing new product development, I remember that Mercedes-Benz was looking at putting a joystick in instead of a steering wheel. Especially since the millennials were very used to joysticks, and in fact it allowed the car to be done whether or not it was in an English style roadway or the roadways that we're, whether or not you drive on the right or the left. So while joystick was not breakthrough technology, implementing it into a car was breakthrough technology. Similarly, you know where I may be going with this.
Parking permits?
Parking permits, access to the beach with license plate readers and other things like that. I would hope that we could look at how we can overlay some of our technology and what would be necessary to make it a viable option. Even though the answer may be, this is not viable because X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. I think it'll be viable with parking permits. And we are hopeful we're going to be looking at new parking permit software that will eliminate the hang tags. I think it's a little bit more difficult with the beach because, of access. There's a town on Cape Cod, Harwich, that has the license plate reader technology for entrance to the dump. But there really is no way to stop people who don't have a permit from driving right on in. Basically, they rely on the distance between when you hit the reader and you hit their house. Somebody can run out and snag you and stop you. But, that would be a thing at the beach. How do you prevent the person who doesn't have a permit and hasn't paid from getting into the park?
I'll also mention something else, just throw it out because I like going to tag sales. And it just so happened that last Saturday, actually Thursday through Saturday, the actress Glenn Close's house in Bedford was having a tag sale. And I just couldn't help. But anyway, while I was there, I was speaking to a woman who's from Wilton, who was asking whether or not the town might consider a beach sticker for a non-resident, at a much higher price. But they were saying, I go from Wilton to the Darien beaches because I like it, I always have, and I guess the current price is $45. Is it possible for possibly giving figuring out how often that might happen? And she said for her, she might be willing to pay $300 just to get the sticker instead of each time paying the individual cost. So I'm just throwing that out there as a concept, to be considered. So, because she asked me to. She was very nice. But is there anything else for Kate? I really want to thank you. As always, it's a very good meeting to have you here and reiterate a lot of this stuff to bring all of us up to speed.
You're welcome.
Anything else for Kate, or can we let her get home and after a long day?
Yeah, hopefully getting home will be easier than getting back here tonight.
Tomorrow, yes.
Oh, no, tonight. It took me almost an hour to come in.
Really?
Yes, it was backed up from the state line all the way to Darien.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Rush hour.
Hey, again, thank you.
Thank you.
I really appreciate your time. So let's go on to the rest of the schedule that we'll try and do very quickly. I sent out the Board of Ed schedule. For people that are new to the Board of Ed, they will be holding a meeting on the 2nd to explain their budget book. I may actually be going to it as well because we have a new superintendent and a new chief financial officer, and I don't know what changes they may or may not be doing with the book that I've looked at for the last 10 years or so. On Saturday the 4th is an all-day session for all of the Board of Ed budgets. And unlike the town, where we will not be hearing from the harbor master, we do hear from every department. And sometimes we spend a tremendous amount on departments that if they were left out of the budget wouldn't be material. And we hear about tubers and pianos and other things along those lines.
Yeah, but you get to speak after each, there's public comment after each department. Also, if you're planning on staying all day, bring a lunch, because they put lunch in there, but it never happens.
It never happens.
And there's not enough time to get out.
Yeah.
No.
Right. And they're always running late.
Pretty much
They,
from the minute
did
it
they-
starts.
Film that live?
Yes.
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 They do film it live, but again, and thank you, Deb Ritchie, having at one time been vice chair of education, was able to understand that we will be, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take all of our comments and put it together, and Beth and Peter have the wonderful opportunity to consolidate them. And so when we're sending the comments, I'm going to ask you to send it to Peter, Beth, and myself. We cannot, again, have conversations, so don't reply all, please. So we're not in any more violation of FOIA than I typically am. We're then going to discuss it and vote on it. But we have a very quick turnaround. What I gave you for our meetings, I actually said we have a meeting on the 20th. We do not, unless we're meeting at my house. Since Town Hall will be closed for Martin Luther King's Day. This is the second year in a row I've done that. So at least I am consistent. But we have a meeting on the 6th, and our presentation to the Board of Ed, which will be co-delivered by Peter and Beth, will be on the 21st. Thank you for Deb for doing that. But that doesn't give us a lot of time. And one of the things that we will not do is, if they answer the question, we're not going to ask it again. We'd like to keep it down to very short. Some of it could be budget oriented, others could be philosophy oriented. My understanding is where we have been under 2% for the last couple of years, we will not be starting under 2% on this budget. I should also let you know that I was invited to participate with Jamie and John Zagroski on the library budget. They also will be coming in much higher than they have in the past. I can't get into specifics because that hasn't gone to their board yet, so it would be unfair. But Alan, who's been running the library for many years, is scheduled to retire in August, which I believe was planned. He has built up a significant number of vacation days, so that will be paid out to him, and the pension will also be affecting their budget significantly. There's a couple of other one-time items that I'm not going to discuss because Jamie is investigating some of those. And so I'll let Jamie do their investigation. We don't need to create something new. Board of Selectmen, I will be sending to those that are new how we did the budget last year. We're going to continue to reconcile what's going on, and actually we can thank Mark, because Mark, when we were on rules one time, asked me to add to any of the bonding what the annual cost was, and I thought that was a really good idea, and so we implemented that last year, and we'll continue to do that so we know the ongoing cost. Now, we do go and do it over 20 years because we're not sure what the Board of Finance is going to be doing it over, and they're typically doing lower yields, which cost more, but cost less on the interest side. But we do want to have, since we do have the expertise of bonding in this committee, it's a good year to take a look at the bonding. It's also a good year to take a look at the fixed assets, because when I started to do a quick review of that capital non-recurring asset, there was an item there for about $162,000, which was labeled Board of Finance Infrastructure Fund. And it hasn't been used for a number of years. And so I've requested Kate and Jen to consider closing out that project and adding it into, and bringing it to the Board of Finance and adding it into their contingency. Now that fund currently, we only close out projects once a year, around September kind of thing. And there's about $5 million in that fund right now. And if they close out this without even getting into the other ones that I'd like to look at to see why they're hanging out there, the contingency on that account is about $1 million. So 20% is appearing to be contingency before we look at some of these other items. And if our guidelines for the general fund is to be around 12%, and that being 20% seems a little high. So potentially some of that can move out, similar to how we paid $500,000 last year on the general fund. So that's something else I'd like to investigate this year. Teacher's contract. I don't know how to say this because I don't typically ever challenge John. And I thought his presentation was very good, and I liked how he looked at certain things. I didn't like how he presented the teacher's contract. Some information that I have from Dr. Adley. The teacher's contract covers 485 employees, FTEs. It's not just teachers, it's every certified professional. So if we have school psychologists and other things, they're in there as well. Now, I have to put on my glasses so I'm quoting it properly. I had previously asked for some information, and I know John was a little bit concerned because it appeared that we were giving them an 11% increase over the last 3 years, almost 12%. That was very concerning. But it wasn't dealing with what the contract really is at all. First of all, as of today, 28% of our teachers are already at the grade 19. And if you think that's high, we are amongst the lowest of our DERG with number of teachers at the highest grade, which is part of the reason when they were looking at the pension plans and whether or not your average teacher salary was higher than the state average, we were the lowest of our DERG in what our average teacher salary was. So while we're at 28%, there are other towns that are at 30, 40% at the highest grade.
Jack, how long does it take to get to that grade 19?
About 19, 20 years. Well, you're starting at a different level, but probably about 15 years or so. The analysis that was done by the Board of Finance that did have towns and what they were paying in Massachusetts, really, I can give you towns in New Jersey also. Irrelevant. In addition, I also thought comparing us to Hartford, Waterbury, and some of the other communities were irrelevant. If you really want to compare, go to their schools instead of Darien schools. There's a reason why you compare to our Durgs or other similar towns. I understand Norwalk and Stamford because they're our neighboring towns and they're all competitive with us for the same teachers. And if you want to go to similar towns, you can go to the Avon, the Farmingtons up north, which have similar school qualities and rankings as we do, if you want to compare what they're doing. So that was on the analysis side. But if we have currently 28% at the top step and projected to increase to 32% in the first year of the contract. So when I did a quick calculation, which says 28% of our teachers are only getting a 1.5% increase. And if I use 3.6 for the other percentage, the actual increase in these 3 years, in the first year is 3%, and the next 2 years is under 3%. Okay, so that's just the starting point. Then you have to look at the other parts of the contract. We have approximately 120 teachers that are in the middle school and the high school. And in the last contract, we were able to get Middlesex teachers to teach 4.5 courses as opposed to 4, which would have been a change of 6 teachers through attrition. However, the 4.5 didn't work. We also have a number of teachers that are currently teaching, instead of 4 or 4.5 courses, 5 classes. And they're being paid an 11% premium on their salary to teach that 5th class. That equals about $260,000 a year. So while that all sounds like good information, let me tell you the next step of what this contract did. All of our Middlesex and high school teachers are now required to teach 5 courses. Mm-hmm. So basically, anybody who was getting the 11% stipend are now only getting a 3% raise, and they're not getting any more money for doing it. And in fact, all of the other teachers who were there, regardless of the grade, are now being said, I'm giving you a 3% raise, 3.5%, but you have to work 11% more. So, I don't know about you, but that to me sounds pretty good. And there's some cost that hasn't been calculated. If you take the 120 teachers and say that everybody has to work 11% more, over the next couple of years, that relates to probably about 10 teachers through attrition that we will not have to hire. And at an average salary of about $85,000, adding $15,000 more for benefits on health care and that's about $100,000 a year. So that's about a 12 basis point reduction in our taxes based upon just that one thing, and maybe as much as 15 basis points ongoing in our taxes. In addition, when I was in the library, I asked the library what their employees pay for their health care. They pay 10%. Our teachers pay 21% and have been paying 21% for the last 2 contracts. Now, we're not the highest. Ridgefield, who actually started this during the time that Paul Hendrickson was the CFO, decided to go to arbitration about 3 contracts ago with their teachers, and in arbitration won the HSA type of thing and then all the other unions had to fall in place. But even when I compare to New Canaan, that will first be paying 21% in 2022 fiscal year. That's 2 years away from what we're talking about. Our teacher's deductible is $2,500 and $5,000. New Canaan will be $2,250 and $4,500. So when you look at all of these things, the only one that really, from what I'm seeing, is paying more than us is Ridgefield, that is going to 22 in year 2022 and 23 in year 2023. So when you look and add at all these things and compare it to the town side, and I know there's been a lot of, oh my goodness, you gave them a 3.4% raise, how high that is, and I understand that that's still high with everything else. We are asking about 20% of our teachers to work 11% more with no salary increase. We are reducing salaries on somebody else. A good percentage of our teachers are not ever going to see that 3.4 because they're at the 1.5%, which will increase. We also tend to see that we have turnover, and so if you have a $100,000 experienced teacher teaching and we're replacing them, typically they're coming in at about $65,000, which is a significant amount of what the real cost of any of these teacher contracts are, because in our last teacher contract, I believe we were at 3.4%, and I believe the teacher contract salary, the salary increase in the last budget was someplace in the neighborhood of about 2.8%. So if we're going to be and we're going to be having a further detail on this, we also got change in the language, and I don't have it exact, but there's change in the tutoring language explaining who can tutor certain people at certain times. And it's more, from what I understand, I may be misstating it, a tutor cannot tutor a student if in the fall they're going to have that student in their class. That was one of the changes that we got in language. On the other hand, we gave back, which was important to many of the teachers, we gave some personal day carryover, which was important. And having experienced this from my own son, having this in the corporate world when his son was born, we are now giving non-birth parent leave, which personally I think is really a great situation. And not that much of a giveaway that, we're losing our shirt, but it was good additions. And I also feel giving good teachers who wish to stay here fair compensation is not a bad thing. So I just wanted to mention that it's good that I sit in the back of the room, because during the conversation of the teacher contract, I was squirming in my chair. So
will we see, with all these different aspects, which have a different impact, each of them, on the budget, will we see an aggregate of all these different factors to say, okay, the contract will cost X, Y, Z dollars more in the aggregate?
What I'm trying to get, and again, it's before the holidays, so I don't want to be a Grinch, but I have no problems really requesting a Grinch type thing, is I'd like to have the number of teachers that we currently have in each of these steps, in each of the categories. I have a master's, this and that, and fill that out with what the current salary is, what the next three salaries are, because we can easily move them along. And since we have nothing to do during the holidays, if I can get that, we can calculate out what the actual salary increases will be based upon the basic movement of what's going over there, even before we look at what our natural turnover is in teachers. So that, I think, is a better reflection of what I would like to present to the RTM, because I actually think this is a pretty good contract. And my hat's off to those that negotiated this. And while it may be higher than what the municipal workers are currently getting, there is a reason, because there are these other contributing factors of why it may have occurred this way.
Do we get the data on the head count? You were talking about attrition and not replacing. We also get the data on the head count, right?
Yes. Now, they aren't publicizing this, that over time, if you think that everybody has to work 11% more, because we usually have enough turnover in any given year that they can figure out, and if in fact we have a decline in our student population, remember we have that big bubble that's moving through right now. It doesn't look like the elementary schools have that same bubble. So before all these new houses are things that we may rebubble again. But the fact of the matter is that it means that if we end up with less students in the high school and in Middlesex, that they can through attrition, and it's attrition in making sure that it's attrition in the subject matter that you can reduce. If all English teachers leave, you can't adjust, obviously. But it does give us some flexibility, and hopefully if we can get these numbers, we can then track what's going on. Because I do agree with what Bert's saying. I don't know what the aggregate is. And it's very difficult to go into the budget and pull out, here are all the teachers. So, in the last budget review, the Board of Ed is looking for a shortfall in what they budgeted in excess cost reimbursement of, I can't remember, is it 160 or 138,000? It's one of the two. So, and from what we knew last year, there's about $1 million of expenses that have been presented to the state for reimbursement in the next fiscal year that's aging out. But we may not necessarily see $1 million reduction in special ed because we have other students that are just not meeting the threshold of excess cost reimbursement. The good news is some of the pop that came back was that there were 60 students in we saw an increase in special ed. This was just done at the last special ed presentation. So, yeah, I lost track of it.
I'm sorry, Jack, 60 increase relative to when?
To
Fiscal year.
the fiscal year of what they were planning. They had 60 new students come. 30
In 1 year?
Yeah. 32 of them are students returning back into the system. And that's highly commendable because we said if we build the right programs and students return, over time, that's how we're going to see the reduction in our outplacement.
So these were kids that we put at some other school.
Some yes. Some were parents who had put their kids elsewhere and then brought them back. Some people who had moved out of town and moved back in.
We can't with the understanding that you cannot get too granular in this because it starts to identify children, and we don't want to be identifying children at a high level.
Yeah, so what we're saying is that there's sort of a net return out of the high cost element of...
I would expect that some of them are doing a reduction in the high cost, yes. which is very positive.
I don't think he's saying that. He's not. You don't know.
I don't know. I do know that there have been some additional high costs that are going in. New ones. So I can't necessarily know what the net number is, but I can say from a number of students, we are seeing more come in than we're placing. You can have a student that comes into the district and, as an example, needs $500,000 worth of services in an outplacement, and we could have had 3 students or 5 students that came back, which we were spending $100,000 each. So even though we have a net in, all right, the net is going to be the same.
Yeah, we're still going to have to look at the numbers at the bottom line.
Yeah, the numbers are more important than some of the finances with this because they don't necessarily match up student for student. So, so that takes care of that. And as I said, I'm hesitant to ever disagree with John, and he'll remind me that I might have just done so. The other thing in his presentation is that we look at the Board of Selectmen a little bit differently than John. John gave expenses. When we look at the Board of Selectmen, it's only because how we calculate. The Board of Selectmen have their expenses, of which $3 million is the library. Okay, so even if we were to take them out, the library of just that, the revenue associated with the Board of Selectmen is taken off of the total taxes that are necessary and not shown as a net number, and then the remaining balance is what we need to raise from taxes. The way we look at the Board of Selectmen is we look at their number and do another look with what their revenue is and compare expenses less revenue to expenses less revenue and compare those two numbers. And so changes in revenue also will have a difference in what goes on. So we over time have sometimes seen the Board of Selectmen be a little bit higher than the Board of Selectmen is presenting. That's all I'm going to say. So, but when we're going through the numbers, we'll look at it because that's what we're reconciling back to. Otherwise, I thought John gave a great presentation. I think they, looking at the homes and the change in the revow was very important. The last revow in my district, District 3, we had homes that saw increases of taxes of 20%. And meantime, they were very annoyed. Some of the members were sitting on this committee. They were very annoyed because they were having a 20% increase on their home, and other people were getting $20,000 off their taxes. So, you know.
Yeah, more of that here. That's what this is saying.
Yep.
Happen again.
Yep.
And not to that magnitude.
Yes. So, I mean, and that happened in Westport, and the taxpayers revolted, seriously. And they went and they basically told all the boards, you're not doing more than a 2% increase, I don't care. So, you know, because, you know, we're doing quartiles of hopefully value of homes. So there's a lot more of us in that bottom quarter to equal what's in that top quarter. And you know, so that's just there.
And who in Westport did that? FNB in their town?
No, I think the taxpayers did,
Well,
which is more dangerous.
And how?
I'm not totally familiar with it, but I know that they did cap the taxes. They went in there and they started
Pitchforks.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, they may have referendum. Let's see, we did that.
The excess cost number was 174,000.
Thank you. Very, very short. By the way, the only reason I got by with this agenda, which I will never be able to do again, is because Donna is retiring. Otherwise, she would have told me I had to cut out the typical verbiage that I have there. I'm going to put Martha on the spot. There's a lot of discussion going on. I'm not here to discuss the values of Pear Tree Point, but rather, if there's been a question, and I think I saw it in the article also, has things stopped, or what's going on in the committee?
I would say it's slowed,
Okay.
but I'll know more in our next meeting. As you probably read, Jamie has kind of gone back and said that the Park and Rec Commission should reevaluate their charge, and in light of some of the public comment, and decide what they still want or what they may want to alter. Let's see, she's asked that we look at what renovations could be done to the existing facility within a $96,000 budget, which is something that is valuable input, I think.
I would have thought that that's where it started.
No, we're not making. I'm really saying I really don't want to make political comment at this time. I want committees to be able to do their committee work.
And she suggested that a coastal engineering firm be hired to take a look at precisely the conditions of the beach and what can and cannot be done. And going back also to the Park and Rec Commission, once they sort of determine what their charge will be, she's asked that they hold a series of public information meetings so the town can react to the charge. And lastly, the police department has come in and said that they would like a maritime substation at the
Beach.
At the beach. I mean, currently they have a very small area at the boat club, and they used to have one of the rooms in the existing bathhouse, but that was eliminated after, I think, Sandy. And so the police commission right now is sort of deliberating to determine what it is they're looking for. And once they've come up with that determination, they will go back to, it'll be presented to the Park and Rec Commission. And the Park and Rec Commission will have to decide, do they want to incorporate that in the building charge, or do they not want to accept that? So I think that's basically where things are. I mean, the presentation to the ZBA on the two-story facility at the moment has been suspended.
Yeah, I think the only other things, if I have read properly, was the drainage, which has been blamed for the flooding.
The check valve.
The check valve.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. That
Can't they
is
just do that?
what?
Can't they just do that?
Well, that's what Jamie said. That's maintenance. That should not be part of
Except
the
if you're
project.
going to, I mean, the one thing we have to consider, if you're going to expand the side beach and redo the parking lot and move curbs, right now, that's right at the edge of the existing beach. If the beach, gets expanded there, you may not, you may have wasted your money. So I think a determination really has to be made first.
That's valuable information
Yeah,
based upon
what's
what's
going to
being
happen.
said.
One other thing I left out, she's asked that the concession stand be defined.
Well, the only comment I've made is I even have problems with the concept of concession stand defined. I think the real question is, should we be serving food there? And then if we're serving food, what are the alternatives for serving food? I know in some of the beaches, they actually use vending machines. You were talking at your swim club, they have vending machines there for ice cream and sodas and that. And then the operations or other things like that. So the first thing is food. What type of food? What are the alternatives for that? As opposed to locking into a concession stand, which in and of itself may not be the appropriate answer. So that was my only comment on.
And then one other thing, the next meeting, I think, Martha, is Wednesday, right?
Yes, it is this Wednesday at 7 o'clock.
Or maybe 6?
They used to be, look on the website.
Well said.
It has been 6, but I think we're moving
We're
to
going back to
7.
7. Right.
So Is there any other questions associated with that? I mean, all we're doing is, as I said, we want the building committees to be able to manage their own project, and, you know, where we do think there's input. I mean, we're fortunate because Martha's on that committee. So
I would like to ask a question. So, just for some clarity, so right now I know you're kind of looking at the cost within the
Renovation.
but you really, at this point, are now going to wait for the commission to come back with
Yes.
either confirming your charge or giving you a new charge. So that's
Right.
kind of
Or altering it. Yeah.
alternating.
Right.
So that's kind of, you're just kind of on a little bit of a hold right
Yes,
now. So
yes.
and when do they meet, and when do they think they're going to consider that charge?
They are meeting after our meeting on Wednesday, and I don't know
If they're bringing that up or not, or
you know, what they're going to
Okay.
be doing, what they're discussing.
Yeah, no, I just was
But I don't think
looking
they'll
at
be
some
ready
timing and what
at this
that-
point, because they're probably waiting for input from the police commission. And they're probably waiting to hear what the renovation figures are as well, I would assume.
Just a quick question on how you allocate costs, and I know this is the quickest, I'll be real quick. If the police were to say, I'd like an office on the second story, and let's just say that the whole thing costs $2 million, and that's, call it 25% of the space. So, quick math, 500 grand. Does that 500 grand get allocated to the police budget, or does that sit in the Parks and Rec?
it sits in the town's budget.
Got it. So there's no allocation process, okay?
No, the thing is, and we remind people on occasion that even our public schools are owned by the town, not by the Board of Ed. The Board of Ed has three words: care, custody, and maintenance, or something like that they're supposed to do for these buildings. But it is not, they don't own them. So even if you recall, when we bought the house that was next to Holmes, and actually it was kind of funny because I'm just thinking Joanne Hennessy added on at the RTM that we wanted the house to be torn down, all right, and that was added on to our resolution. The Board of Ed was tickled pink because that put it into the town side, and had it not been put that way, since the Board of Ed was going to tear it down anyway, it would have ended up on the Board of Ed side. So that's the only distinction in capital that we'll make, is between Board of Ed and town, but all the buildings are owned by the town.
Got it.
So,
Sorry.
which brings us to Oxbridge. First, I will say, Beth, Stacy, myself, and Peter have a slew of documents that have come to us based upon Stacy using the F word. You want to say which?
Oh, yeah.
Thank you. And so we have all of the building committee documents. I have held on to them only because we had enough reading to go on, but I will be releasing them because they're public documents, and now you have some Christmas reading. The part of it, I also know from the last meeting that there was a change, and I caught Kip at the state of the town and asked him a quick question. I said, okay, I hear that you guys are much higher than what you're supposed to be at, and that we're coming back with ed specs. So, are we changing the ed specs of what the state requires, or are we just changing what was put into that building? And what I heard was some of what we had put into the building were greater than the specific ed specs, and that's what we were looking to do. Now, there is still some discussion, I'm assuming, going on the number of ELP.
So
and-
actually, you left at the meeting.
Yeah.
So they actually voted. The Board of Ed tonight voted, and they came to. So the architect gave a list. So just to clarify, so yes, they came in over what we had appropriated, and the building committee asked the architect to come back with recommendations to bring things down. On this. Dirt is really expensive. That's what I've learned. Dirt is really expensive.
Way more than I realized.
So right away they were able to make some changes that didn't affect programming or ed specs with dirt and some design things, and they already brought it down by that. Now they're down to some ed spec things, which went to the Board of Ed tonight. And the Board of Ed, they struggled with ELP classrooms. So currently we have 8 ELP classes in the district. We have 2 at Oxbridge, 4 at Royal, and 2 at Tokenique. In the ed specs, there was a place for 10, right? Room for a little growth. The recommendation from the architect and administration was that it was okay to cut 2 classes and keep it at 8 classes.
2 ELP classes.
ELP classes. Some Board of Ed members were not comfortable with that because we have had a history of not building schools big enough and value engineering. So what they finally came to tonight after a lot of debate and they voted like 4 times.
Yeah, they kept getting 4 and 4.
They couldn't agree. They finally voted to do 9 classes.
Which was Deb Ritchie's suggestion from the start.
Yep. So they finally voted to do 9 ELP classes. The other change is the Board of Ed only put in actually 2 DLC classrooms, and actually administration came back with, and I think the architects came back with numbers that they need more. So they went ahead with the 4. They did with the 4 DLC classes, and then they changed. DLC is Developmental Learning Center. So they also voted to cut the physical class room size
from 900 to 800 square feet.
So
within that range,
some were 1,000 square feet.
Oh, and
they're going to 900,
and then the remainder.
Yes,
right.
And it's only floor space. It's
only
not
floor
like
space.
Only
so floor
it's
space.
A little, you have to think in terms of you have cabinets lining, and so they're talking about this. The open floor space is what, not the whole.
And I'm going to interject here because this is where I actually took notes for the thing. Other than that, I didn't. Understand the state has certain requirements. The only requirements that they specifically state is for pre-kindergarten, the space has to be 1,000, and for kindergarten, 900. They then have in the guidelines that Duke had mentioned, that if you look at the metrics, the guidelines per student in a classroom is between 45.7 and 50.8 square feet per student, so that depending upon how many you have in a classroom, that would determine that. And the other...
45.7.
Yeah. So one of the things that were important that they did was that our maximum number of class size is lower than what the state allows. The state is it allows for 26. We're much lower, but the classrooms are being...
Well, not much, 24.
Okay, well, that's still 100 square feet.
Right there.
Yeah. So we're building the class sizes for 26 to not lock in future, and provide some flexibility, but not lock in future boards 8-9 years down the road.
Right.
In addition, the state's a little bit funny because if, let's say, in a kindergarten class, the requirement's 900, and we choose to build 1,200, well, that extra 300 are not considered eligible expenses for reimbursement.
Yep.
So you're balancing what they allow, what we want, and what they're going to reimburse us for. Plus, they have another caveat, which is they look, after they look at the class sizes and other things like that, for overall space, which includes offices, cafeterias, gyms, everything else like that, to be approximately 100 to 125 square foot per student of total reimbursable. So if we choose to have our hallways a little bit wider, we might not be reimbursed for that. Now, the other thing that I have asked, which I think they were already doing, but I asked for, and shows that I'm old, that the Board of Ed take a sharp pencil and calculate out what the real savings are from consolidating ELP. My own thought process, and I'm going to come up with a number. The reality is we can bond a school building, I believe, for 22 years, where everything else is required for 20, but let's just go on 20. If we are saving $100,000 a year, not just counting that we're optimizing the education for the ELP, but because we don't need to have a nurse at 4 or 5 different locations, and we don't need to have people traveling between schools in order to provide services because everybody's in the same place. And let's just say we can save $100,000 a year. Well, we're going to be bonding this anyway. So over the 20 years, that's $2 million worth of savings. So, in fact, if it's $200,000, that's $4 million worth of savings on a $63 million building where these 8 or 9 classes are probably not costing us $4 to $5 million to build, considering everything else that's being built. So that's what I'm saying is the rationale for what's going through. We should have this type of understanding, and I've requested that the Board of Ed do some of this analysis sooner rather than later. I've spoken to Kip about this, and he was happy with that as well. I'm sorry.
Well, Martha, what's the rough reimbursement rate for Darien? I know it ranges, and it's
we're very
but
in the old days. And seriously, in the old days, it was 18 to 22% we could be getting back.
Right.
I think we're down to almost
Either 10.
Yeah, 10%.
I thought we heard 10.
10, but we get a bump up for the cost of ELP.
Right.
So, right. So what the exact one is, the rates are someplace in there, and it was very important that we got it in this year, which is why we voted to authorize it before the June and authorize the building committee, because there weren't a lot of projects this year from what we were told from the state. And we had, the rate was set for reimbursement for towns based upon our wealth, and there's no guarantee in the next budget we were going to get the same rate. And the anticipation was the rate would be lower. So even if we're getting 10%, that's $6.5 million that, is nothing to really sneeze over when you consider that if we didn't get it, our taxpayers are paying for it. Now, it's obviously going to be less than 6.5 because of the acceptable things, but even $4 and $5 million is a lot of money.
And this is happening while in Norwalk, they're building a new high school that gets 80% reimbursement.
No, not that high. Believe it or not, there is a misunderstanding on some things on Norwalk and Stanford. So on the state, based upon what taxes we pay in, we're about the 8th largest contributor to taxes for the state. We get back about less than a tenth of a penny for every tax dollar we put in. Now, Stanford is the 2nd largest contributor to taxes to the state, only behind Greenwich, and they're only getting about 6 cents per every dollar. And Norwalk is getting someplace in the neighborhood of about 80 cents per dollar. regardless of what Duff may be saying or not. So they're underpaid also. So when you look at Fairfield County, none of our towns, with the exception of 2, are getting anything equal to what they're contributing. And so while we may say, oh, they're getting more, believe it or not, Norwalk and Stamford are not getting their tax contributions either. And when you look at some of these things for Stamford, who at 26 basis points right now is probably a very reasonable rate on what their basis points are, it would change their tax by about 10%, and they would be down around 20 basis points, which is very competitive, had the state reimburse them for what they're contributing. I only know this because I work with some people in Stamford on their various government levels. So, I do mention that they're not getting a free ride. But please continue.
No, I don't have anything else. So I think the building.
They did vote on a lot of things that they all agreed on.
Yes. Yeah. So I think they got the number down. And the next, what they say, the next building committee they have a design meeting tomorrow, but then they have the next public building committee meeting wasn't until January. I think Duke said.
You're right. I think Thursday is something.
Maybe this Thursday.
This Thursday or something.
Oh, yeah, look.
Yeah,
they
I think
wanted
that
to get
is
this,
another.
which is why they went ahead and voted and kept voting because they wanted
Building.
to give them direction.
I will
for the next
tomorrow
meeting.
Sorry, did I say
distribute
facilities?
all
Sorry.
of the documents that I have associated with this. The most important one is the one that we got about a week ago that shows what the contributions are, and I will also send Stacy's numbers so you can ask which ones they approved and they didn't. But I do encourage, if you have the opportunity to go to attend these. If not, they are on Vimeo, and it's now time for them to work. They are not looking to change the educational value. We've stressed this a number of times, as did Kip to me. So, you got to have confidence in the fact that they're going to do a good job.
If the building committee said that if the Board of Ed wanted to keep something, that they would support the Board of Ed, and if they need to come back to us for more money, that they would do it. But there is an Oxbridge building committee for Thursday morning, but there's no agenda yet. So.
Okay, one last thing. We have some outstanding minutes, one that has not been written, which I have to write, which means it'll be another month before we see it. But we do have some outstanding minutes, which we can close up.
From October 15th, yeah.
Yeah, well, we don't meet in November, so it's really hard to do this. Is there any comments on that meeting minutes? Seeing none, do I have a motion to approve? Stacy, Lisa, all in favor? By the way, you can vote even if you weren't there.
Is that right?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Wow.
Yes.
Yes.
All in
You read them.
favor?
If you watched it,
If you watch them and you read them, you're good.
I definitely read them.
Okay.
Thank you.
Can I say it was unanimous? I didn't
If you
see
like.
it.
If you like.
I wasn't seeing a hand over in the corner. Thank you.
You can vote for Dave Martin.
Do I have I want to thank you all. I know this was later, but I always think that meeting with Kate is absolutely phenomenal. And she will, as you will see for those of you during the budget season, continue to bust my chops. Do I have a motion? To adjourn.
To adjourn.
Second. Thank you all. Have a very good holiday season.
Happy holidays.
At 8 o'clock.